The scream that ripped through the quiet Italian church wasn't human. It was too high, too guttural, filled with a hatred that twisted the very air. The penitent on the other side of the screen wasn't just a sinner seeking forgiveness. It was something else, and the man hearing it, sitting in the suffocating dark of the confessional, wasn't just a priest. He was a soldier on the front line of a war nobody else could see. This was the daily reality for Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, and his confessional was the battlefield. If you believe there's more to this world than what we see, make sure you're subscribed, because the stories from inside that box are more terrifying than any fiction. For over 50 years, Padre Pio spent most of his life inside that cramped wooden box, 10, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. Thousands upon thousands of souls passed through, unburdening themselves. To the outside world, he was a humble friar, a confessor, a man who bore the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. But to the forces of darkness, he was a threat. They knew his power. They knew that every soul he absolved was a soul snatched from their grasp. And so, they didn't just send sinners to him, they came themselves, wearing human skin as a disguise. The devil's primary weapon in the confessional was deception. Padre Pio himself wrote about it in his letters. Demons would appear disguised as penitents, sometimes even as holy figures. They would confess sins with perfect eloquence, trying to trap him. One day, a man came to him, dressed elegantly, his manners refined. He began to confess, accusing himself of every sin imaginable, from murder to heresy. He spoke with a cold, detached air. Padre Pio listened patiently, but something felt terribly wrong. The confession was too perfect, too intellectual. There was no repentance, no sorrow. It was a performance. Finally, Pio looked him straight in the eye and asked a simple question. "Do you love the Madonna?" The man's refined mask shattered. A wave of pure fury contorted his face as he shrieked her before vanishing, leaving behind an unbearable smell of sulfur that lingered for hours. But how did he know? Padre Pio possessed a terrifying gift, a charism known as cardiognosis, the ability to read souls. He could see a person's life laid bare before him. He knew sins that people had long forgotten or were too ashamed to mention. This gift was his primary weapon against demonic deception. He could see past the disguise to the rotten core within. Many true penitents were shocked when he would remind them of a specific sin from their childhood they had omitted. Wait, he would say, "What about that time when you were 10 years old, and you for the honest soul?" It was a moment of profound grace. But for the demon in disguise, it was an exposure. He was calling them out, showing them that their masks were useless before him. One of the most famous and harrowing encounters happened with a young girl. She was brought to the monastery, clearly possessed. Her family was desperate. When they brought her before Padre Pio, the demon inside her recognized him immediately. It began to scream, not in the girl's voice, but in a deep, booming male voice that should have been impossible for her vocal cords. It hurled blasphemies and insults at Pio, calling him by name, mocking his piety and his wounds. Witnesses said the entire church seemed to grow cold. The demon shrieked, "I will not leave. This soul is mine." Padre Pio remained calm. He didn't engage in a long conversation. He simply held up his crucifix, looked at the girl, and commanded with absolute authority, "In the name of God, be silent and depart." The girl's body convulsed violently. A final, unearthly scream was torn from her throat, and then she collapsed, unconscious. When she awoke moments later, she was calm. Her eyes were clear. She had no memory of what had happened. She was free. The attacks weren't always so dramatic. Sometimes they were insidious, subtle. The demon wouldn't possess the person, but would influence them from the outside. A man once came to confession and began listing terrible sins. Padre Pio listened, but again, his spiritual senses told him something was wrong. The man's soul didn't feel stained with these particular evils. He stopped the man and said, "None of what you just told me is true. Who told you to say these things?" The penitent was stunned into silence. He later admitted that as he waited in line, he had felt an overwhelming, strange compulsion to invent these sins, to lie in the confessional. The demon's goal was simple: to make a mockery of the sacrament, to turn an act of grace into an act of sacrilege. Pio, by seeing the truth of the man's soul, broke the spell. This war was not confined to the confessional. In fact, what happened there was just a symptom of a larger, constant battle. The demons Padre Pio defeated in the day would return to his cell at night for revenge. Other friars would hear terrible noises coming from his room, crashing, screaming, the sound of a brutal beating. In the morning, they would find him exhausted, covered in bruises, his face swollen. The demons, whom he called Bluebeards or Kosaki, would appear to him in monstrous forms, as huge black cats or as twisted, horrifying figures. They beat him with chains, threw him across the room, and tried to suffocate him. Why? Because they couldn't stand the work he was doing. Every soul he saved was a personal injury to them. The physical beatings were their impotent rage made manifest. They couldn't break his spirit, so they tried, and failed, to break his body. So what were his weapons in this secret war? It wasn't just his spiritual sight. His greatest weapon was humility. The devil's core sin is pride. Humility is its perfect antidote. When demons would appear as beautiful angels to tempt him with pride, he would laugh at them. He called himself a poor friar who prays, and he meant it. He knew that his power came not from himself, but from God. His other weapons were constant prayer, especially the rosary, which he called the weapon, and his own suffering. He offered up the pain from the stigmata and the demonic beatings for the conversion of sinners. He was fighting on two fronts, actively in the confessional and passively through his suffering in his cell. Another demonic tactic was to use twisted logic to drive penitents to despair. A highly intelligent man, a scholar, came to Padre Pio tormented by scruples. The devil was whispering in his ear, convincing him that his sins were too great for God to forgive, that his confession was invalid, that he was damned no matter what he did. It was a prison of the mind. The man explained his complex, circular arguments to Padre Pio. Pio didn't engage in a theological debate. He cut through the knot of demonic logic with a single, powerful statement. He looked at the man with compassion and authority and said, "You are tormenting yourself. The devil is trying to trap you in your own mind. Place all of this noise at the foot of the cross and trust in God's mercy, which is infinitely greater than your sin." The simple, the profound truth of that statement shattered the intellectual prison the demon had built. The man felt an immediate sense of peace and liberation. The spiritual battle often manifested in physical senses, particularly smell. After a demonic encounter, witnesses often reported an overpowering stench of sulfur, a classic sign of the demonic. It would cling to the confessional for hours, a foul reminder of the evil that had been present. But Padre Pio's presence was associated with the opposite, a beautiful, supernatural fragrance of flowers, often roses, violets, or lilies. This became known as the odor of sanctity. People would smell it from a distance when he was approaching, or it would appear in a moment of answered prayer. It was a sign of the divine presence that surrounded him, a heavenly fragrance that drove out the stench of hell. The confessional was a place where these two opposing forces met, a clash of the profane and the sacred made real to the senses. We know these stories not just from Padre Pio's own letters to his spiritual directors, but from the sworn testimony of those who lived with him. Fellow friars would hear the battles at night. They would see him the next day, battered but serene. Penitent after penitent came out of the confessional transformed, some weeping with relief, others pale with shock at what he had revealed to them. Father Agostino of San Marco, his friend and confessor, documented many of these events. He wrote about the infernal beasts and the diabolical obsessions that Pio faced. These were not legends that grew over time. They were events witnessed and recorded by sober, credible men who saw the war with their own eyes. It's easy to get lost in the sensational aspects, the screams, the sulfur, the physical combat. But we have to remember the purpose of it all. The devil wasn't attacking Padre Pio just to hurt him. He was attacking him to stop him from saving souls. The confessional was the exit ramp from the road to damnation. It was the spiritual emergency room where souls on the brink of death were saved. Every confession was a rescue mission. The demons fought so hard because the stakes were so high. The eternal destiny of a human person, Padre Pio understood this better than anyone. That's why he endured the long hours, the physical pain, and the terrifying encounters. He was a shepherd, protecting his flock from wolves that were all too real. Even as he grew old and frail, the attacks did not stop. In some ways, they intensified. The devil seemed to know his time was running out. In his final years, the physical beatings became more severe. The demonic presence in the confessional was a constant threat, but Pio never wavered. His resolve was forged in 50 years of combat. He once told a friend, "The devil is like a rabid dog tied to a chain. It cannot bite you unless you go within range of the chain." He spent his entire life standing just within range of that chain, pulling souls away from the dog's snapping jaws. He knew the risks, and he accepted them willingly. His last words were, "Jeezy, Maria, Jesus, Mary," the names that had been his shield and his sword throughout his entire war. Padre Pio's story is not a historical curiosity. It's a stark reminder of a reality our modern world has tried very hard to forget: the reality of sin, the reality of evil, and the reality of the immense power of God's forgiveness. His confessional was a microcosm of the spiritual battle that every single person faces, whether they realize it or not. The temptations, the lies, the whispers of despair, these are the same tactics used by the same enemy. Padre Pio's life shows us that this war is real, but it also shows us that it can be won. What part of Padre Pio's spiritual combat shocks you the most? The physical beatings, the demonic disguises, or his ability to read souls? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for watching.